Viewer discretion advised. This story contains descriptions of real historical atrocities. It's a quiet June afternoon in central France. The sun rests gently on the rooftops of a small village called Oradour-sur-Glane. Children chase one another down narrow streets, their laughter mixing with the rhythmic toll of a church bell. The air smells of bread, grass, and the faint smoke of fireplaces. There is no war here, at least, not yet. But somewhere far beyond the green hills, the war is rumbling closer. The Allies have landed in Normandy just 6 days ago, and the German army is tightening its grip across the occupied territories. One particular division, the 2nd SS Panzer Division des Reich, is moving north under orders to crush the French resistance. Exhausted, humiliated, and brutalized by years of fighting on the Eastern Front, these soldiers carry not only weapons, but anger, frustration, and a terrifying need to make an example. On the morning of June 10, 1944, armored vehicles roll toward Oradour. Dust trails rise behind them like ghosts. The villagers see the smoke before they hear the engines. Some believe it's another patrol passing through. Nothing unusual in an occupied land. Others feel an unease that has no name. Mothers call their children inside. Old men step into doorways, shading their eyes. When the first German trucks stop in the village square, the air shifts. The soldiers move with mechanical precision, sealing every exit. They wear black uniforms that absorb the light, and their faces are unreadable, as if carved from stone. The officer in charge, Adolf Diekmann, announces that this is a routine inspection. No one resists. The villagers are told to gather for an identity check. Men in one place, women and children in another. No one knows that these will be their last steps. As the people assemble, the church bell keeps ringing. The sound, once so familiar, now feels different, like a countdown. Carts creak, shoes scrape against cobblestones. A baby cries. Then silence. Absolute, heavy silence. Later, survivors would describe that silence as the moment the world split in two, the living and the dead. Hours from now, Oradour-sur-Glane will no longer exist. 642 people, men, women, and children, will vanish in smoke and fire. The village will be left exactly as it falls, untouched, frozen in time. To this day, Oradour stands in ruins. Rusted bicycles lean against burned-out walls. Sewing machines sit on cracked floors. A child's doll lies in the dust where it fell in 1944. The wind still moves through the empty streets, carrying the echo of voices that once were. They call it the Village of the Ghosts. And if you walk there now, in the golden light of evening, you might feel that they are still waiting, still asking the same question the world never answered. Why? The smell of smoke began to spread even before the last gunfire faded. It crawled along the cobblestones, rising through the cracks of burning houses, mixing with the scent of scorched wheat and diesel. Somewhere, a cow moaned in its stall, then fell silent. Evening approached slowly, the way it does after rain. But there was no rain, only the dull light of a dying day over a dying village. The SS soldiers moved through the streets like shadows, silent, efficient, wiping soot from their faces, reloading their weapons, and setting more fires. Their boots left dark prints on the stones. Inside one of the barns, men still breathed. The gunfire had torn through the lower bodies, as the soldiers intended, leaving many alive among the dead. Some groaned, some tried to crawl, dragging themselves through blood and straw toward the doors that would never open. The smell of gasoline was sharp, metallic. When the flames reached them, there were no more voices, only the crackle of burning wood and flesh, the collapse of beams, and then, again, silence. The SS had learned something terrible on the Eastern Front. That horror was more effective when it was systematic. There was no chaos in Oradour, no drunken cruelty, or madness. Only structure, an operation carried out step by step, checked, verified, and completed. Near the square, a soldier paused to watch the church burn. He wasn't older than 20. For a moment, the reflection of the flames danced in his eyes. He looked away quickly, lit a cigarette, and joined the others. Later, he would write to his mother that nothing unusual had happened that day. Inside the church, the fire climbed the walls like a living thing. The painted saints blackened, their faces peeling from the heat. Mothers huddled around the altar, clutching their children. A few tried to force the door, but bullets struck the handle from the outside. Glass exploded, smoke filled the air. One girl, no older than 8, screamed for her father. Her voice carried out through the stone walls, sharp and pure, until it stopped. When Marguerite Ruffenche escaped, she did not run. She crawled through blood and glass into the tall grass behind the building. Her dress was torn, her hair burned. The air outside was gray, thick with ash. She crawled until her arms gave out and then lay still, listening. She heard footsteps, German voices, the sound of laughter. Then, after a while, nothing. The SS spent the night in nearby camps, drinking and cleaning their weapons. They spoke of the operation as a success. Some were proud, others indifferent. They called it a lesson for the terrorists. In their reports, it was only a number, 642 dead. No names, no faces. But the next morning, the lesson began to echo. A farmer named Joseph arrived from a nearby village, drawn by the black column of smoke. He called out, but no one answered. The air was heavy and still. He walked slowly down the main road, past the burned-out cars and the smell of ash. Where there had been a bakery, there was now a crater. Where there had been laughter, only crows. He reached the church last. Its roof was gone, its bell melted into a pool of bronze. Inside, he found nothing human, only shadows of what once had been. He dropped to his knees, crossed himself, and wept. By afternoon, others came. Relatives, neighbors, strangers who refused to believe. They searched through ruins with bare hands, turning over stones and beams. In one house, they found a child's shoe. In another, a pocket watch frozen at 3:15. Someone found a note half burned in the ashes. "We are together. Do not be afraid." No one ever discovered who wrote it. For days, the smell lingered. Flies gathered. The French gendarmes arrived, then the Germans again. This time to make sure nothing was left. They took photographs, not as evidence of crime, but as trophies. The reports described a pacification operation. The phrase was clean, bureaucratic, sterile. It hid what really happened, that a village was murdered. Not for what it did, but for what it represented: defiance. When the news reached the resistance, they swore vengeance. Some of them attacked convoys, ambushed patrols, and killed without hesitation. But vengeance could not rebuild Oradour. The town remained dead, its streets empty, its houses open to the sky. Weeks later, Allied soldiers moving north passed through the region. They were greeted by smoke still rising from the ground. An American war correspondent wrote, "There are no words for this, only stones that remember." After the liberation, the French government began to document the massacre. Investigators walked through the ruins with notebooks and cameras. They marked every site where people had been found. The barns were now graves, the church, a tomb. Marguerite Ruffenche, the only adult survivor, testified before them. Her hands trembled as she spoke, her voice breaking as she described the screams of children, the fire, the fall from the window. She ended her testimony with a single sentence: "I want the world to see what they did to us." And the world did. General Charles de Gaulle visited the site in 1945. He walked in silence through the ruins, his uniform brushing against the weeds that had begun to grow through the stones. He stopped at the church, removed his hat, and stood for a long moment without speaking. Then he said quietly to his aide, "This must remain as it is, so that France never forgets." The order was given. Oradour-sur-Glane would not be rebuilt. A new village would rise nearby, but the old one, burned, blackened, and broken, would stand untouched as a memorial. No one would live there again. No one would rebuild its walls or ring its bell. And so it stayed. Over the years, the ruins began to shift under the weight of time. Ivy grew over charred stones, grass covered the square, and yet everything remained recognizable. The tram tracks that led nowhere, the sewing machine rusting on a table, the car of Dr. Desorteaux still parked in front of the garage where he died. Visitors who come today describe an uncanny stillness. Birds do not sing inside the village. The air feels heavier. Tour guides speak in whispers. The past seems to press against the present, demanding to be remembered. Some say that on quiet days, especially at dusk, you can hear faint echoes, footsteps, laughter, a bell that no longer exists. But perhaps it's only the wind passing through the hollow windows, or memory refusing to fade. The soldiers of Das Reich went on to fight in Normandy, leaving a trail of destruction behind them. Some were killed in action, others captured. Adolf Diekmann, the man who ordered the massacre, died 3 weeks later in combat near Normandy. He never faced judgment. His death spared him the trial that might have forced him to look at what he'd done. After the war, the survivors and relatives of the dead demanded justice. In 1953, a trial was held in Bordeaux. 21 former SS soldiers stood accused. They looked older, tired, almost ordinary. They insisted they were following orders, that they had no choice. Some broke down, others remained stone-faced. The verdict came quickly. 19 were convicted. But France, eager to reconcile with Germany, soon released most of them. West Germany refused to extradite the rest. The families of Oradour watched justice slip away, as if the fire had burned not only their homes, but the very idea of accountability. Decades later, one more trial would be attempted. In 2014, 70 years after the massacre, only one man was still alive, a 90-year-old former SS soldier. He was questioned, but never charged. The case was closed. Insufficient evidence, the report said. Oradour remained silent. Perhaps it is better that way. Perhaps words, laws, and judgments can never equal the truth of those ruins. The blackened stones, the empty windows, the clock that stopped at the moment the world ended. The tragedy of Oradour-sur-Glane is not only that it happened, but that it could happen anywhere. The soldiers who did it were not monsters in the shadows. They were human, trained to obey, convinced they were right. And the villagers were not heroes or rebels, just people who believed the war was far away. That, in the end, is what makes Oradour unbearable. It shows what ordinary people can do when morality is replaced by command, and what ordinary lives can become when evil is efficient. The ghosts of Oradour do not seek revenge. They ask for remembrance. Every year, on June 10th, the bells ring again, not from the old church, but from the new one in the rebuilt village nearby. Survivors, their children and strangers gather to walk through the ruins. They carry flowers, photographs, and silence. And as the sun sets over the valley, the last light catches the bronze plaque at the entrance. Souviens-toi, remember. Because some places in the world are not meant to be healed. They are meant to be remembered forever. They say the ruins of Oradour breathe, not with lungs, not with life, but with memory. If you stand very still in the center of the old village, beneath the open sky where once there was a roof, you can feel it, a pulse beneath the silence. The wind carries it, the light reveals it. It is not a ghost story in the usual sense. It is the story of what happens when the living refuse to bury the dead too deeply. After the war, France had many wounds. But none like this. Towns could be rebuilt, bridges repaired, graves tended. Oradour was different. It wasn't simply destroyed. It had been erased and then preserved in its erasure. In 1945, General de Gaulle returned to power, and among his first symbolic acts was to declare Oradour-sur-Glane a martyr village. The words sounded noble, but behind them was a haunting truth. A martyr must die for others to live. When engineers arrived to survey the ruins, they expected to rebuild. They brought sketches, measurements, materials, but the survivors said no. They refused to let the bulldozers in. "This is a cemetery," said one of them. "You don't rebuild a cemetery, you guard it." The government agreed. The ashes, the melted iron, the broken walls would remain as they were. And so the work began, not of reconstruction, but of preservation. By 1946, barbed wire surrounded the old village. Signs appeared. Silence. Respect this place. The entry gate bore a single word. Souviens-toi. Remember. Behind it, the world had stopped. Visitors arrived cautiously at first, soldiers, widows, journalists. They stepped onto the cracked cobblestones with reverence, whispering as if in church. Some wept openly. Others could not. One American correspondent wrote, "I have seen battlefields. I have seen cities flattened by bombs, but I have never seen a place that feels so alive in its own death." There were still personal objects everywhere, evidence of interrupted lives. A child's bicycle leaned against a wall, its tires long gone, the chain rusted solid. In the schoolroom, burned books lay scattered, their pages fused together. In a house, a clock stopped forever at 3:17 p.m., the moment the shooting began. People left flowers there, then photographs, then prayers written on scraps of paper. Marguerite Ruffenche, the woman who survived the church, became the quiet guardian of this ghost village. She lived nearby, rarely speaking of that day. Every June 10th, she would walk to the ruins alone. She would pause before the church door, touch the wall gently, and whisper a few words no one ever heard. When she died in 1988, her funeral procession passed through the ruins. The villagers said it was as if the last witness was finally returning home. As the decades passed, Oradour became a place of pilgrimage, not for religion, but for conscience. School children were brought there to understand the war, not through numbers or dates, but through silence. The French presidents came too: de Gaulle, Mitterrand, Chirac, Hollande, Macron, each walking the same path through the ruins, each stopping in front of the church where time had stopped. They all said the same thing in different words: never again. But never again is fragile. In the 1950s, some politicians wanted to rebuild Oradour completely, to make it livable again, to erase the trauma. The survivors resisted fiercely. They knew that rebuilding would mean forgetting. One wrote in a letter to the government, "If we rebuild these walls, we will kill them a second time." The letter worked. The ruins stayed. In 1999, the French state built a new structure at the edge of the old village, the Centre de la Mémoire, the Center of Memory. Its architecture is stark and modern, built from the same rough stone as the ruins but cut into clean lines. It doesn't overshadow the village. It kneels beside it. Inside, there are photographs of the victims, personal items recovered from the debris, and the testimonies of those who survived. You walk through dark corridors where recordings whisper in the air, voices reading names, children's laughter fading into static, a heartbeat that slows and stops. The curators of the center faced a challenge: how to show horror without turning it into spectacle. They avoided mannequins, reenactments, or dramatic lighting. Instead, they used absence. Rooms are left almost empty. Shadows fall across the displays. Visitors must fill the silence with their own imagination. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful form of remembrance. Outside, the old Oradour still waits. No one touches it. Rain has worn the walls down. Grass grows between the cobbles. The iron of burned cars bleeds rust onto the ground. Every few years, engineers reinforce a crumbling arch or secure a beam, but only to keep it from collapsing entirely. The goal is not to restore the ruins, but to let them decay slowly, naturally, to let time do what it does, while still allowing the world to watch. It is, in its own way, a living wound. For decades, survivors struggled with a different kind of silence, the silence of justice denied. In the years after the war, many of the perpetrators lived openly in Germany. Some even returned to civilian life as teachers, policemen, businessmen. The French survivors sent letters, petitions, demands for extradition. Few were answered. By the time a new generation of prosecutors reopened the case in the 1980s, most of the killers were dead. Still, France refused to let go. In 2014, 70 years after the massacre, the German president, Joachim Gauck, visited Oradour-sur-Glane with the French president, François Hollande. It was the first time a German head of state had entered the ruins. Together, they walked in silence to the church. Gauck, visibly shaken, whispered a few words. "I bow before the victims." For a moment, history exhaled. It wasn't forgiveness. Perhaps there can be none, but it was acknowledgement. That night, television showed the two men standing among the ruins, their shadows long on the walls. And people across Europe watched, reminded that beneath the polished words of treaties and alliances, the past still smolders. Oradour's ghosts have been patient. They have watched generations come and go, wars start and end. They have seen tourists with cameras, children holding ice cream, old veterans standing motionless before the church door. They do not speak, but their presence is unmistakable. The air carries something there, a vibration, a whisper at the edge of hearing. Some visitors describe sudden tears without knowing why. Others say they felt an invisible weight pressing on their chest as they entered the square. Psychologists might call it empathy or collective memory. The locals call it la mémoire vivante, the living memory. It's not the memory of facts. It's the memory of feeling, of standing in a place where evil once had absolute power and realizing that the earth still remembers. Every June 10th, the commemoration begins early. A slow procession of people walks through the ruins, each carrying a single white flower. No speeches, no music, only footsteps. They stop before the church, where a plaque lists the names of the 642 victims, men, women, and children, ages 1 to 81. The youngest was an infant only a few weeks old. The oldest, a farmer who couldn't run. As the sun sets, the new village's bells begin to ring. Their sound travels down the hill, through the trees, into the ruins. For a brief moment, it feels as if the old bell has returned, as if time folds and the dead can hear. And then the sound fades, leaving only the cicadas and the wind. For France, Oradour is not just a site of mourning. It is a mirror. It reflects both the cruelty of the occupiers and the fragility of humanity. It asks questions that have no answers. How could neighbors become executioners? How does obedience turn to murder? And why does memory fade so easily when comfort returns? Writers and historians have struggled to capture it. Some compare it to Litis in Czechoslovakia, to My Lai in Vietnam, to the countless villages in Ukraine, Poland, and Russia erased by war. But Oradour stands apart because it was preserved, not rebuilt, not repurposed. It exists like a photograph that never develops fully, always hovering between presence and absence. Filmmakers who visit say the hardest thing is recording sound, because there is almost none. The ruins swallow noise. Even footsteps seem to dissolve into the dust. For documentary makers, that silence becomes a character of its own, the ghost that refuses to fade. At the Centre de la Mémoire, one exhibit shows aerial footage of the village. From above, The pattern of streets and houses forms a shape that some say resembles a human face, its mouth open, as if still screaming. Whether coincidence or not, it captures what Oradour has become, the frozen expression of a world that once allowed this to happen. Not everyone agrees on how to remember. Some critics argue that the ruins risk becoming a kind of dark tourism, a place where visitors consume tragedy instead of understanding it. Others insist that showing the horror is essential, that without the confrontation, the lesson disappears. The curators try to balance both, reminding visitors that Oradour is not entertainment. It is testimony, and yet the story continues to echo beyond France. Survivors from Rwanda, Bosnia, and Ukraine have visited, finding in Oradour a reflection of their own destroyed villages. "It is the same silence," one of them said. "Different century, same silence." That is perhaps Oradour's most painful legacy. It keeps proving itself relevant. At dusk, when the gates close and the visitors leave, the village returns to its stillness. The last light catches on rusted bicycles and window frames. The air smells of stone and grass. Somewhere a bell rings in the new town, and its echo drifts down into the valley. The ruins don't respond. They never do, but the sound lingers, as if waiting for an answer that will never come. In a world that moves faster every year, Oradour remains immovable, a place where time disobeys. A warning carved in ash and silence. It tells us that civilization is not measured by progress, but by memory, by the willingness to look at the darkest corners of our own history and not turn away. Because if the past can be forgotten, it can be repeated. And so, the ruins keep speaking, not with words, but with the space between them. In the rusted sewing machine, the melted bell, the walls that still stand against the sky, they whisper the same message to anyone who dares to listen. Remember us, not for how we died, but for how quickly the world can let such things happen. The ghosts of Oradour do not ask for pity, they ask for vigilance. And as long as the wind moves through those empty streets, their voices will never fade. Night falls differently in Oradour-sur-Glane. It doesn't arrive, it settles, slow and patient, like dust. The last light fades over the hills of Limousin, and the ruins turn from gray to black. In the absence of tourists, the air becomes heavier, more intimate. You can hear the creak of wood that no longer holds a roof, the soft sigh of grass brushing against stone, the faint hum of insects living among what once were bedrooms. There are no streetlights, no candles, only the moon. It glints off twisted rails, outlines the skeletons of cars, and paints silver streaks across the church where hundreds once sought safety. From a distance, the village looks like a map of bones. For those who have walked here at night, the feeling is impossible to describe. It's not fear, not exactly. It's awareness. Every step feels observed, as if the ground remembers the weight of each foot that once ran, fell, or knelt here. Some visitors say they feel the presence of eyes in the dark. Others feel only the unbearable quiet, thick as smoke. Silence has many kinds. There's the silence of peace, of snow falling on fields. There's the silence of awe in a cathedral or a mountain. But Oradour's silence is different. It is the silence that comes after screams, after fire, after humanity has shown itself what it is capable of. It's a silence that doesn't comfort, it accuses. When the last survivors passed away, journalists feared that Oradour would fade with them, that once the living voices were gone, the ruins would lose their meaning. But something else happened instead. The story grew. Teachers, historians, filmmakers, travelers, they carried it further. Oradour became not a French tragedy, but a human one. Its name began appearing beside others in the dark geography of history. Lidis, Nanking, Srebrenica, Bucha. In each of these places, the same question rises. How could ordinary men do this? The answer hides in the banality of uniforms, orders, and silence. Evil does not need rage. It needs permission. It needs people willing to look away. That is the echo that reaches from 1944 to today. For the villagers who rebuilt nearby, life continued, but never quite normally. The new Oradour has cafes, schools, laughter. Yet every window faces the old ruins, visible across the field like a scar. Children grow up hearing the stories before they can read. On clear mornings, you can hear the church bell of the new town answer the silence of the old. One sound belonging to life, the other to memory. Every year on June 10th, the procession begins before dawn. Candles flicker along the path. The elderly walk beside children who never met the dead, but carry their names on ribbons. They move through the archway inscribed with Souviens-toi, remember, and into the ruins. There are no speeches at first. Only the long sound of footsteps on stone. The birds fall quiet. At 10 a.m., the exact hour when the SS arrived in 1944, a single bell rings. Then the names are read, one by one. It takes hours. Some names belong to entire families, spoken together like chords. Desorteaux, Roufange, Caillet, Beaulieu. When the final name is spoken, the crowd stands in absolute silence. The only sound left is the wind moving through the grass. For those who listen to that moment, it feels as if the earth itself is holding its breath. It's not the silence of emptiness, but of presence, the presence of all those who never left. Historians often say that memory fades by generations, that after 70, 80 years, the past becomes abstract. But Oradour resists abstraction. You cannot romanticize ashes. You cannot sanitize the melted bell or the child's bicycle. The evidence is too physical. It confronts you with what you would rather forget. That civilization is a thin layer stretched over something much darker. In 2013, a German school group visited the ruins. Teenagers walked through the streets, whispering to one another. One of them, a girl of 15, began to cry quietly in the church. When her teacher asked why, she said, "Because they look like us. They had toys, shoes, and schools, and they were killed for nothing." That, perhaps, is the purest understanding anyone can reach. Some historians argue that memory is not inherited, it's chosen. You decide whether to remember. And yet, standing in Oradour, choice seems irrelevant. The memory imposes itself. The air demands it. It becomes part of you, like a faint scar you carry after leaving. There is a sound many visitors notice but rarely identify. A low hum, constant, almost imperceptible. Some say it's the wind. Others believe it's the resonance of the nearby river, flowing beneath the ruins. But once you hear it, you can't unhear it. It follows you as you leave, like a pulse from underground. Maybe it's just nature, or maybe it's the echo of those who never got to speak. For decades after the war, the people of France argued about how to remember, whether to seek revenge, forgiveness, or simply endurance. The survivors themselves rarely spoke publicly. They didn't need to. The ruins spoke for them. They still do. Filmmakers who record in Oradour face a dilemma: how to capture something that is already perfect in its stillness. No camera can reproduce that silence. Microphones pick up birds, footsteps, distant cars, but not the weight in the air. The documentaries always end the same way, with long shots of the ruins at dusk, the wind passing through, the narrator falling silent. Because the story tells itself. In the archives of France Télévisions, there's a recording from the 1960s of Marguerite Roufange's voice, faint, trembling, in an old woman's French. "I escaped," she says, "but I never left." Her words hang in the air like smoke. You realize then that Oradour is not about death. It's about what remains after death, the endurance of testimony. In 2017, lightning struck one of the remaining stone walls. It cracked and fell, revealing the layers of ash preserved inside since 1944. Archaeologists carefully documented it, finding fragments of glass, nails, and bone. They did not remove them. They covered the section again, sealed it, and left it to rest. Even nature, it seems, knows not to disturb this grave. And yet, Oradour is not only about mourning. It is also a warning that radiates outward. Each visitor becomes a messenger. They leave carrying a fragment of that silence inside them. A teacher who visits brings it to her students. A journalist to his readers. A soldier to his conscience. The ruins speak through those who listen. The echoes reach farther than France. In distant corners of the world, there are villages erased by war, their stories half told or forgotten. But whenever people try to describe them, they use Oradour as a reference point. It has become a word for the unspeakable. In the 21st century, when history seems to repeat itself with new names and new uniforms, Oradour stands as a question carved in stone. Have we learned? The honest answer is uncertain. Every generation must learn again. Every generation must walk through its own ruins before understanding what is truly at stake when hatred gains discipline. One French historian wrote, "The greatest danger is not violence, it is indifference. That is why Oradour's silence must keep echoing, because indifference grows where noise distracts, and nothing cuts through noise like silence." As night deepens, the new village's lights flicker in the distance, a faint line of yellow against the dark. The people sleep. The old village does not. It remains awake under the stars. The wind rises slightly, and the grass bends. Somewhere, an owl calls. The ruins answer with nothing but patience. In that stillness, you begin to understand something almost unbearable. The dead of Oradour are not asking for vengeance or tears. They are asking for responsibility. To remember is not to mourn. It is to act, to guard the threshold between history and oblivion. In the end, perhaps that is why the place endures. Not because France decreed it, but because humanity needs it. We need to see the cost of silence made visible. We need to walk through streets where time stopped, to touch the stones that refuse to forget, to feel, for a brief moment, the weight of history pressing gently against our chest. Then, when we leave, we carry that weight back into the world of sound and motion, where choices still matter. And maybe, somewhere in that movement, the ghosts of Oradour find peace, knowing that the living still listen. The camera fades. The narrator falls silent. The final sound is wind. Then the faint toll of a bell from the new church, a sound that bridges the distance between the living and the dead. The echo travels out of Oradour, across France, across the world. It carries a single message. Beware the silence that follows obedience, because that silence, once it begins, never really ends. You've been listening to the Ghosts of Oradour-sur-Glane, a place where time stopped on June 10th, 1944, and never began again. A place that still breathes in silence, reminding us that history is not in books. It's beneath our feet. If this story moved you, remember, the ruins still stand. You can walk those streets. You can hear that silence for yourself. And when you do, listen closely. It's not just the past you're hearing. It's the warning of what happens when humanity forgets. This was Tell Me What Happened. Subscribe for more untold horrors of World War II. And never let the silence speak louder than the truth.